Marhaba, salam everybody. Beautiful to see you guys come. It couldn't have been more timely, salam alaikum, because we have John right here, the director. You're gonna love him, especially after you see the film, so we're keeping this short, but please stay after the film for the Q&A. And a shout out to Asas and MSU for making this possible. I'm gonna have John greet you, the director, and like I said, we're gonna have snacks and a little Q&A after, so please participate in this. تفضل John, أهلا وسهلا. أهلا تفضل حبيبي.
Good evening. So first, thank you to Dr. Ramzi Salti. Thank you to Asas. Thank you to Muslim Student Union and to the Markaz. Thanks to you guys for coming. So I'll be here afterward to talk, to chat with all of you, and have a great trip to Morocco, and I'll see you when you get back.
All right, so I should first of all say that this is one of the highlights of my career at Stanford. I've been teaching here for 20 years, John, and throughout these 20 years of teaching Arabic and Middle Eastern languages and literatures, I have been sort of trying to convey the message of this film to Western and Middle Eastern audiences alike in terms of the large number of cultural productions that take place in the Arab world, but that end up sort of demonizing the Arab world in the process. And how do we, as people from the Middle East, as Arabs, as Muslims, as Christians, as Jews from the Middle East, how do we end up being represented on the Western screen, and how do we end up represented in Hollywood? And unfortunately, we are being, especially today, the day is a horrible day Hollywood-wide, we're being systematically demonized to a degree that nobody even takes attention anymore. Nobody pays attention to these kind of systematic demonizations of the other. Today, film-wise, I don't know how many of you know that the movie Beirut was released today. Has anyone heard of this film, Beirut?
Yeah.
Please don't watch it, man. Hashtag boycott Beirut movie.
Oh.
I myself was born and raised in Beirut, and Beirut is a far from ideal place. It is not a paradise, it is not perfect, but it is certainly not what we see in the movie Beirut that was released today, starring John Hamm. So we're talking, you know, big Hollywood production. Of course it wasn't filmed in Beirut, but it's called Beirut. Of course it does not feature any Lebanese artists, but it's supposed to be in Lebanon. Of course it shows the Lebanese as savages and as terrorists and as these horrible people. And that's something that I think John documented so beautifully in the film, especially with these snippets. John, you must have gone through so much footage to find everything from the name Abdul and Abdel and the negative connotations of those words, which, by the way, are just usually Abdullah or Abdullah, you know, and they take just the first couple of syllables from that. So it's a very timely film, I think, that John made, and especially in terms of this new Beirut movie. The New York Times just ran an interesting article, finally, kind of like critiquing this, saying when our Western audience is going to wake up to this kind of stereotyping, and John actually has, and he'll talk about it, an extensive video library that includes, you know, a list, and I'm sure maybe he'll be able to share that with us, if not tonight, but through email as well, and through his important work. So Casablanca Mon Amour, الدار البيضاء حبي, this amazing film. I'm going to start by asking this one question to John Slattery, who is the director of the film, and that is, how come you made a film about the representations of Arabs and Muslims in America/Hollywood?
So I came back to the States. I was overseas for a couple of years, and I came to San Francisco, and people asked, "Oh, where were you?" And I said, "Oh, I was teaching in Paris for a year." And the response from most people, whether they're looking for a job or friends, they would say different things, but they all fit under one category. They would say, "Paris. I love Paris," or, you know, "Oh, my partner and I, we're gonna go when we have a honeymoon. We're gonna go to Paris for sure. Or I love Paris. So anyway, everything was love for Paris. And then in the same conversations with the same people, they would say, "Oh, where were you before that?" And I would say, "I was in Morocco for a couple of years." And then the same people would go, "Oh, were you scared?" Or "How was that?" Or "What was that like?" So Paris is love, and Morocco is fear. This is just from like average, and San Francisco, people have traveled. It's not that sort of far away place. And then in addition to the fear, the other same people would say things like, "Have you ever seen Black Hawk Down?" Or "There's this movie I saw, it was shot in Morocco with the mummy and the guy and the horse." I can't. So Hollywood or movies like definitely filled in their kind of imagination for what they thought of about Morocco, and so in a way this film is kind of connecting that fear in movies, right? The two responses that I got from people. So anyway, that's where it came from. Yeah.
And you fell in love with Morocco, didn't you, John? I've been reading about you online, and there's this thing where you even picked up some Darija, which is the Moroccan dialect, and he speaks it quite nicely. Yeah. Shukran for that. Next trip should be to Beirut, John.
Well, okay, so first, you probably know this, but in Paris, every food place you can go where they're selling food, the Moroccans that I met in Paris, Moroccans or Tunisian Algerians, all the food is called, it's called Lebanese food because everybody knows maybe Syria and Lebanon are the two places where if you want real good food, that's...
Yeah, make a movie about that. Lebanese food. I know Reem, who worked tirelessly to make this happen tonight, had a question that was about what steps can be taken to counter the narrative that exists in Hollywood and in the Western media about Arabs and Muslims. Any ideas? I mean, I think the first step, before you answer, John, is doing what you just did. Making a movie that shows, that counteracts this narrative. But what can people do to counteract this sort of systematic stereotyping of the other?
So there's Dr. Jack Shaheen, media consultant, professor in Illinois for many, many years, wrote this book, which is my Bible for this film, called Reel Bad Arabs, R-E-E-L. So, and that book is a compendium of his research for many, many years. He's the one who did the original research on it, and he's the one that I went to find these clips and to find what films they were in. And so over a period of many years, him and his graduate students researched thousands of films, thousands of... So since I'm getting old, I have, and can't remember things, I have, just to answer that maybe quick, this is from Dr. Jack Shaheen.
Who passed away, I think, last year. Great man. His book, Reel Bad Arabs.
Yeah. And
that was turned into a film, also called Reel Bad Arabs. The book is a must-read, and, he's passed away, Allah yarhamu. He should have included this movie, Beirut, that I keep talking about in his list as just the latest in high-budget Hollywood movies that end up reinforcing negative stereotypes.
So he goes through, like lots of titles of things, and that's great. But one of the things, Hollywood still shows black pimps and Latino gangbangers, but pop culture has also made some room for Will Smith and Ugly Betty. I've seen The Arab Hijacker, but where is the Arab Father? Shaheen says. What we need, he says, seriously, is a sitcom called Everybody Loves Abdullah. I think, it's that thing of presence, awareness. I suppose, like any kind of battle, you have to fight it on every front. So it's about critiquing, challenging what is out there. I think there have been recently, using social media, a lot of movements addressing the representation or the lack thereof of women in media, the representation or lack thereof other minorities. But so I think it is really a process of shaming corporations that do this, but also making films that you want to see and making communities making films. I mean, I think it's one thing to say making it because it has to get distributed, it has to be seen by people, but people are doing that. And yeah, you were mentioning Cannes Film Festival, and so the filmmakers, I know Moroccan filmmakers and Lebanese filmmakers and filmmakers from all over are doing that. That's happening, but I think it's I mean, one of the things Shaheen brings up is this, kind of before 1970s and after 1970s, and so you had the kind of I don't know, really the situation in Iran with the revolution and the hostages, and then you had the oil embargo, and then you had this kind of new Arab, right, coming onto the screen. Yeah.
So John mentioned the Cannes Film Festival. I have good news, everybody, at least from our perspective. The Cannes Film Festival this year has chosen on its premiere night a Lebanese movie by a Lebanese female director. Her name is Nadine Labaki. The movie is called Cafarnaum or Cafarnaum. She is, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she has received a lot of awards. She had her first film called Caramel and her second film called Where Do We Go Now? They both received critical reviews, very positive reviews in the West too, and I think that's what's important. And there's a video of her that went viral today when she got the phone call from Cannes and they said your film has been picked, officially selected to premiere on the premiere night of the Cannes Film Festival. So I think these are also some of the things we can do to counteract the narrative, is to have, she does high budget films and she works with, she has networked very well. She's one of the few who has made it. And the other one, of course, and I have to say it, is the Oscar nominated film, which was called The Insult. Which also was filmed in Lebanon. It didn't win the Oscar, but I think it was the first time that Lebanon was nominated as Best Foreign Film. Certainly like these films, at least I haven't seen Nadine's film because it's brand new, but I've seen The Insult, and it's not that we're saying we need to portray the Arab world or Lebanon or Morocco or anywhere as this idealized place where there are no problems, but it's, so The Insult shows Lebanese society at its best and at its worst, with good characters and bad characters, but it is shot on location. It features real Lebanese actors. It works very well for Western cinema to a degree where I guess it was, nominated for an Oscar here in the US. So try to see that. And when people tell you, I might go see that movie Beirut, go take your dollars and put them instead into watching, these movies on Netflix and others that are available now, thank God. So we didn't want to, monopolize the conversation today, John. And Reem, thank you for your thoughtful questions. One last question Reem had was regarded like, when did this begin? But I think you kind of answered it in terms that it never really, it came along with the celluloid. It came along with cinema. It just moved through different stages from black and white to, but is there anything you'd like to add for Reem and people who ask you, like, where did this begin,
Yeah, so I think there's this, the timeline of international villainy, right? So who are your villains and who gets to, who are they? So this is, again, we'll go back to the Bible of, okay, so to create drama, especially in action with war movies, Hollywood needs bad guys. And in their time, the Japanese and Germans, and later the Koreans and Vietnamese served that role. For a long while, commies were useful foils with their taste for world domination, nukes, and vodka. But with the end of the Cold War, the Soviets became the Russians, and the Russians only worked if they were gangsters. And Hollywood already had the Italians to do that job. Colombian drug traffickers were employed as handy replacements, but then Coke just felt dated. Traditional corporate evildoers are okay, if not that sexy, but there just has to be something about those Arabs. They've got legs. So, yeah, I think he goes through, I'd like to read just 3 quotes from him, the quotes from others, but that he highlights. But yeah, so, I think there was The Sheikh, this film we saw, I don't know, from the 1910s or something.
Black and white.
Black and white, yeah, so there with the intertitles, an Arab sees a woman he wants, he just takes her or whatever. So this was that's the traditional Hollywood sort of, era. But yeah, I think the 1970s, one of the things, just to get to kind of a more recent, this series called NCIS, which is, I mean, I don't know. It's really about creating Arabs, and really Palestinians again get to play that role. But I mean, just as my parents are from Ireland, so as a nation of terrorists ourselves, we feel a kind of compatriotism with Palestinians. Occupation is a strong term in both countries and both places. But so there's these television series where you have. Let me just read a quote real quick. This will kind of.
This is by Jack Shaheen.
Yeah, 3 quotes. So okay, you have Sophocles. Those who tell the stories rule society. And then Edward R. Murrow, American journalist. What we do not see is as important, if not more important, than what we do see. So that is like the absence of,
Right.
characters who are
Right.
just, And then Jack Valenti, who was the former president of the Motion Picture Association of America. If you saw the Oscars anytime in the 80s, he was always, on stage talking about the MPA, and his quote was, "Washington and Hollywood spring from the same DNA." And there's a great book called Hollywood Global, which looks at, and this is every country does this. I mean, obviously the Soviets did this, the Germans did this, but every country has a national cinema, and that national cinema is not just to be exporting, your traditions and culture and getting the word out about how great your people are, but it's also sort of there's a rivalry with other nations. So when the U.S., under the Marshall Plan, sort of at the end of World War II, occupied Germany and occupied Japan and occupied Italy, the very first thing American studios did, they had their own studio people as in soldiers' uniforms, right, was to take the cinemas to make sure that the exportation that American cinema was going to be exported there. So if you talk to anybody who grew up in Japan after the war, or Germany, Wim Wenders talks about this a lot, they were colonized by Hollywood cinema. They grew up, they loved American films because that's all they could see, because American studios made sure that those were, the kind of films that were coming out of there were controlled by our cinema. So that's just the kind of the cooperation between any government and their national cinemas. So this idea that American foreign policy and its relationship, we'll say, with Lebanon, or its relationship with part of Lebanon, or its relationship with Morocco.
So maybe, Reem, I think sometimes because I've been in America, I was here way before, I started teaching at Stanford way before 9/11. And in a way, I think a lot of us Arab Americans felt that we were white before 9/11, or we were invisible on screen. So there was no representation, but, for a while, but then, with 9/11, and since then, there's been this slew of films that, had the misrepresentation, the systematic demonization. And I think that was a new world, Teaching at Stanford was surreal during 9/11. I mean, Arabic went from this language that nobody spoke to suddenly we created an Arabic department, and we currently have, continued. We went through many stages. That's for another discussion, I think, in terms of how interesting it is to teach Arabic at Stanford through the decades. But let me just mention a few shows that you might know about that are mentioned in a brand new article in the New York Times. It's called Beirut was supposed to thrill, instead it offended, in terms of the film. And they do a nice listing of films that people sort of watch and that have permeated the psyche of so many people in America, and establishing the Arab stereotype as a norm. Showtime's Homeland. Have you heard of that film? I have interesting things to say about that if you want to talk to me after. The new Aladdin, not only the film by Disney, but also the musical. In what ways is this harmful? Because it looks sort of, innocent in a way, until you kind of look at it and go, wow, do I really want my kids at that young age to be exposed to that? The movie True Lies by Arnold Schwarzenegger. I loved how the guy in their film mistook Schwarzenegger, the name for the war general. But anyway, Schwarzenegger's True Lies, I think, was my waking up. I was living in Hollywood at the time doing my PhD and writing my dissertation, and True Lies came. I don't know if you've seen this film, very appropriately lies. And I remember watching it and just leaving feeling like, oh God, I want to change my name from Ramzi Salti to you know, John Smith or something. I don't want to be associated with that. But I sat down and I penned my very first published letter to the LA Times, in which I said, you know, true lies, truly lies, and talking about the effect of that on Arab American children and seeing that. So, you know, that kind of blockbuster was maybe before, you know, your time, Lydia Zamali. I'm not sure you were born then. But, you know, so they do list that G.I. Jane, Rules of Engagement, Ben Affleck's Argo, and culminating, of course, in the film with starring John Hamm called Beirut. So it's an interesting article in the New York Times. So we have to say thank you to, although it doesn't necessarily, you know, agree with the fact that there is a systematic divinization, at least it's showing these movies as being repetitive, and you know, it asks the question at the end, when our Western audience is going to get sick of the stereotype and demand a little more. So anyway, so shall we open it up for questions, John, with these very sweet people who came to Stanford on this Thursday evening. So the young lady there, I remember meeting you before, but I forgot your name.
Valerie.
Valerie, please go ahead and ask, and you may ask in Arabic, English, or French.
I wish I could ask in Arabic, but so my question is, you've just been talking about all the films that don't portray an Arab culture more broadly, and I'm wondering, why didn't you pick up on what the reasons were that all the people who you interviewed picked films like Rambo or Van Damme or Steven Seagal? And I think there's a theme there that has to do with an underdog or somebody looking to prevail right over wrong and to undo injustices. And it's a theme that may be cultural because everybody was picking the same films, and it seems like there's a real ethic there that has meaning for why all the people who you asked what was their favorite film, but connected to those films. And I'm wondering what you're thinking about, whether
John,
there's a
you're very
sequel to this
qualified
movie.
to answer
How
that.
we do
Yeah.
the choice
Yeah.
of films.
Thank you. I mean, I think you're even saying it's a universal theme. We all want to identify, you know, with the hero who comes in and saves the underdog. And I certainly was one of those kids growing up in Lebanon and Jordan that identified, you know, with Rambo, you know, and even my name Ramzi. For a while I said, you know, Ramzi, call me Rambo. Didn't realize, you know, till the bad guy suddenly became consistently Arab and me, that, you know, suddenly it was like, oh wait, should I be rooting for them? I certainly don't want to root for the terrorists. We're going to root for this guy. But this guy is also representing the image of the West that's coming in and sort of showing that the Arab world are all savages. There aren't these nuanced portraits of Arabs. So, you know, once in a while they'll put a little good Abdul there who, you know, helped the hero. But certainly there isn't those images you were talking about, you know. And I think that's what we're talking about, Valerie, is not so much like creating films that are, you know, tributes to the Arab world. We have our problems, but to make this percentage of, you know, extremists, this very small percentage, this horrible percentage of extremists in the Middle East representative of the entire nation, without showing one single moderate person, one single, you know, the image that people would relate to. I think we've come to that degree where it's unquestioned, you know. I do want to mention one film, and I know you're going to answer the question, John. Valerie and everyone, if you have HBO, there's a new series called Here and Now. Has anyone heard of it? Oh, good. Very, very selective young man over here. So basically, it is, I think, the first series I've seen on American TV on HBO where they have a Muslim family. And it's an Iranian-American man married to a Palestinian-American woman, and they're Muslims, and they have a child who is grappling with issues of gender identity. He's gender fluid. He wants to be Muslim. He wants to, you know, even wear the hijab, I think. And if he feels like he's a girl, then why shouldn't he? And, you know, so, but at least it's complicated. At least it's nuanced. I'm not saying you're going to say, oh, these are heroes, but at least they exist within the narrative of, you know, a mainstream channel. So that's on HBO. It's called Here and Now. John, you want to answer in terms of the people you interviewed?
Okay, Valerie? Yeah. So, first of all, you know, there's this grand American tradition of Americans going to Morocco to make their films and tell their story. And in many ways we were critiquing that, but we were also part of that, right? Going there to tell our story. So don't think that we also haven't edited and highlighted and made the film we want to make. Do you know what I mean? Like, so people did, a lot of Moroccans, when we asked them, the first thing they said were Moroccan actors. Their favorite actor. Maybe the third actor is Chuck Norris or something like that. And then also, because we were a group of guys traveling around Morocco, we mostly talked to guys on the street, so we have a lot of boys, basically, and boys like Rambo. And also action translates on the screen across the globe, right? You don't need dialogue, you don't need to be able to read the subtitles. Maybe for boys like to see, heroic boys. I think there's a lot of that. Because, I didn't interview teachers or people who had more nuance. I mean, they're there, obviously, Morocco has all of that. So this is a selected, they were looking for kind of common themes, and so I highlighted the American actors they highlighted, but certainly Egyptian actors. Egyptian television is really big in Morocco. That's probably, so any Moroccan anywhere can tell you, and also like who's asking the question. So we're an American crew, so they're gonna, because Moroccans are like the friendliest people in the world, so they're gonna like help us and give us the actors we want to hear, probably. But like if we were an Egyptian crew, they would like be, like cinema culture in Morocco, people know everything about it. So languages, whatever. So this is a reductive, cheesy American version of what Morocco is, yeah. So don't trust the Americans.
No, but the characters are amazing. I mean, the way you captured them as they're talking to you so naturally, and I think that's something I learned from the film. I haven't visited Morocco yet, but you've contributed to my desire to do so. The young lady over there, and then we'll ask Lydia. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
So picking up on the sort of cheesy American theme, and especially after you said that the impetus for making the film was coming back to the US and having these interactions with Americans. So this is a film that you wanted to make for an American audience, presumably, and yet it has the great, kind of terrifying thing of subtitles at the bottom of the screen that is an immediate guarantee that a lot of American audiences won't engage with it. So how has that choice come about? And kind of a related question, because I'm kind of imagining that it probably has to do with the people that you decided to engage with and to make the film with, that this was the language they were more comfortable in, and that was how you guys were going to collaborate. So how did you meet these two young men, and how did the team come together?
And we should note that the narrative that was going on was actually in French, and that was gonna, that would create a whole other discussion about, the French colonial encounter and colonization of Morocco and Lebanon, where I grew up speaking better French than I did my own language, Arabic. Fast forward to me getting a PhD in Arabic in the States. I mean, it's surreal. But I think, some people who may have not realized they were speaking the daddy show. And I think that was really important because that's the language they're comfortable in. They can speak it with passion and not be self-conscious. But otherwise, how did you meet these two young men? And in terms of the subtitles, I totally agree with you. I don't know why, but Americans especially don't like reading subtitles, nor do they enjoy dubbed movies. So I'm not sure how we're going to get Americans to watch foreign movies without,
What you see at the very beginning is the casting. That's the real casting session. We cast for 4 days during Ramadan, which actually was best because there was no lunch break. We could go right through it. So from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, for 4 days, we put ads in the national papers of Morocco. If you want to be in an American film, you only have to be between the ages of over 18 to 25 or something, and we asked people to bring instruments, and there could be a whole film made just from the casting. People reenacted scenes. So we did that, and during the course of that, we found Abdel, and we actually kind of narrowed it down to like 6 people. And we found Abdel, and then Farida, actually Hassan's girlfriend, decided to come in because she was like, what? And then Hassan was actually my cameraman from this film school that we did the casting at. And the very last day, the very last person, his friend who did the casting said, why don't you sit down and do it? And Hassan had watched 4 days of casting, so he sat down and was, so he didn't want to be in the film, which is kind of why I wanted him to be in the film, because I kind of wanted somebody who was resistant to us. And they knew each other. Hassan is from kind of wealthy family, goes to this film school, speaks French as his first language. His Arabic is better than mine, but it's not that, He kind of operates in one world of Casa. Abdel is a Berber from a very working family. That's his relatives in Arshidia. So they're kind of Laurel and Hardy, odd couple for sure. Had all kinds of fights about all kinds of things. So and then we did the voiceover with Hassan, and that's his language. French he just was more comfortable, and yeah. But Morocco, Moroccans speak every language, honestly. And if he wasn't here, I still would say this. I think I said this to someone else tonight. Yeah. So if you go to film festivals or you go around places, especially in film world, that's the only one I know, but I'm sure other worlds. If you go to festivals, the people who are actually connecting people are Moroccans and Lebanese. And I think it's the language, and I think it's just their natural ambassadors of some kind. So you go through Morocco, and there's always going to be somebody who, speaks English really well. I mean, a lot of these guys did in the casting, but we thought about having Abdel and Hassan speak English throughout, because they do. They can speak, but it just felt bizarre, And then they're going to be interacting with Moroccans who, maybe a lot of out in the countryside don't speak English for sure, maybe not even French. So it was just like, I'm happy to have subtitles. I guess it wasn't a concern for me. It limits the film, but I don't care. That's a good question.
So, Valerie, let me have Lydia, who made this possible tonight, the amazing, fabulous Lydia Zamadi, ask a question. She's over here, Valerie. This young lady, I don't have children, I adopted her unofficially. So I'm going to do nepotism for 1 second. Let her ask, and then we'll come back to you, Valerie. Go ahead, Lydia.
So I was recently at a talk with Brennan Stanton, creator of Humans of New York, and there was a picture of a man he showed from Pakistan, who he asked afterwards, he thanked him for showing a positive image of Pakistan, and he was saying, well, I didn't show a positive image, I showed a random image.
Wow.
And I thought that was, it feels like it applies to this movie, because this is very much, similar when it feels like very like day to day, in, not a certain, just one image you're showing, but like kind of their lives and the way they interact with each other as a whole. But I was wondering if you had similar feedback or similar things that, what type of feedback did you receive from Moroccans or other Arabs, or, really anything that you thought was pretty poignant?
Yeah.
Let me just say, Humans of New York, she said, were featured, a Pakistani character, a rich Pakistani scene in New York, and how any representation that is not negative becomes positive, right? Like they said, wow, thank you for portraying me as a human being. Thank you for not portraying me as an evil doer, etc. And I think that's what's sad, is we've come to a degree where if we're just represented, we consider that positive. I want to take it a step further through, and piggyback on your film and say that it's time also to ask for more positive portrayals, especially with, Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these other vehicles now. Ask them, if they do a movie where they do portray somebody who's interesting, who's colorful, doesn't have to be perfect, comes from the Middle East and Muslim, especially right now with, I'm not Muslim myself, seem to be Muslim, and I don't necessarily want to correct people when they assume that, because I'd love to hear what they have to say. And then maybe at the end, go, and by the way, I come from a proud Christian family. But what do you say to what Lydia said?
So the first screening we had was at the Dubai International Film Festival, right? So wealthy Emiratis, Indians, some Moroccans. It was a mixed screenings, but the Moroccans who came to the screening kind of work in Dubai. They're not of the wealthy class, maybe. So they're working people, students, or whatever. And I think so. It's interesting. One of the feedback about representation, and this young woman said, I just wanted to know, I like your film, thank you, whatever, but I just wanted to know why you didn't show like flat screen TVs and some of like the things that we have, you know, that you don't, you know. And I didn't even answer her then. Somebody else said, another Moroccan, I think, or North African said, you know, we live here in this like Dubai where there's like almost like a filthy amount of wealth. You know, it's just like Lamborghinis is nothing for people. So much money and so many flat screen TVs and so much, and it means nothing. You know, it's like it's so empty in some way. And this is a film that shows like people who have everything, but they don't have Lamborghinis, and you know, so like this difference between sort of, I don't know, token representation of wealth versus how do you represent, you know, people who have depth and humanity and those kind of things. So there was a shouting match that went on and people were yelling. It was great because I didn't have to get involved. But I think, you know, so my parents are both from Ireland. They moved to the US in the late 50s. And Ireland, you know, was not even a third world country when they left in the 50s. It was a developing nation of, you know, and maybe only caught up in the 90s, maybe. So poverty is part of, you know, life, whatever. I think when Angela's Ashes, I don't know if you guys remember that book that came out around 2000, it won a Pulitzer Prize. It's a novel written by an Irish guy who immigrated to New York and wrote about his youth growing up in Ireland. And so my mom's been in this country for longer than she lived in Ireland, and she meets Americans, right? And they say, oh, you have an accent, where are you from? And she says, Ireland, like, Angela's Ashes. So for people who, you know, in this country, just to generalize for a second, who don't get passports and don't travel, like a film or a TV show of a character or a book about Angela's Ashes is like, that's how I know your country. I know everything. So then my mom is like thinking, his book is true, but it's this, you know, it was this abusive family. It's like that's not everybody's life. He had like serious poverty, which was inner city at the time, whatever. And so she's embarrassed, and her friends are embarrassed, and they hate this book. And they're telling people, they're just to make it go short with it. They're like, it's not true. Even though she's like, of course it's true, but if you tell people that, then they. So it's this thing of like that piece of media represents their entire history and culture and stuff. And so it's just this thing of like, if these people would just read more books or see more films about Ireland, they would like have a balanced view. But it's unfortunate. So I understand that woman who wanted the flat screen TV. I know why she's saying that, and I understand. You know, I was going to make one film. I can't, you know. When I was in Morocco, I lived there for 2.5 years. I was waiting to be invited by the king to like come teach English at the palace. I swear to God, I would have gone. I would have like had lunch. It'd be great. But they never invited me, so I hung out with like the people, you know, who didn't have flat screen TVs and Lamborghinis. So
what year was the footage shot?
Yeah, so we shot it in 2006, 2007, 2008, raising funds for post-production. 2009, I had a kid. So 2012, it came to festival. So this is, Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah, I didn't have a flat screen TV in 2006 either, and I lived in the Silicon Valley.
Yeah. No, so some of the representation issues were about that. Some other ones are like, Morocco, there's like expats who move to the US and become kind of Anglophiles. There's expats who move to France and are Francophiles. The two don't always get along. I had the Minister of Tourism. I got $5,000 for post-production, which is a little bit of money, but it was a good, nice little chunk from the Moroccan American Association in DC, who really just wanted to see the film to make sure I wasn't being critical of the king. Which I wasn't, because that's not my beef. I don't have a problem with, I'm not there to criticize somebody else's, I could criticize Hollywood or America because that's where I come from, so that was but they gave me this money, and then they sent me an email from the Minister of Tourism, who they had sent the film to, and said he would pay for me to go back to Morocco to make beautiful shots of sunsets, and and like I understand his point of view because he wants more tourists to come there. But I wasn't, I was like, I'll take the trip to Morocco, but I'm not going to put that in my film. So representation, how you're represented, depends on who you are and your perspective, where you come from, what you want to see. But yeah, I got a lot of great, interesting things. I mean, we screened the film at like 22 festivals, mostly in Europe and Taiwan, places. But always Moroccans come there, or Algerians or Tunisians who want to come and see. It's all been very positive, but it's really friendly and positive, but then they'll take me aside and say, I was just wondering why you didn't have more Berber, or why you didn't have, because that's their So yeah.
Valerie, what did you want to say?
Quick question, so just curious, I mean, I know you had some ideas, but did you have a script? going
No
into this
script.
project?
She's asking if
No
it was
script.
scripted.
No, we didn't know what was going to happen, who we were going to meet, where we were going to go. Yeah.
Nice. Yes, ma'am.
This is another question. Did you bring the chicken to the Sahara Desert?
Yeah.
Chicken we bought, and then we shot a scene of them jumping on beds, and they broke the bed, and we gave the chicken to the guy who owned the hotel to pay for the bed.
That would have been interesting to include.
So the chicken didn't die. Yeah.
سعود عندك سؤال حبيبي؟ تفضل.
Has this movie had any reaction from Hollywood itself, or was it like screened there?
Yeah, did the movie screen in any, Hollywood, because it's about Hollywood in Hollywood theater, and perhaps also in terms of like the reviews that came out of the American press of this film?
Yeah. So we actually got a review in the New York Times. It was the first review after the Dubai screening. Reuters did it, and New York Times picked it up. It was a positive, sweet little review. Nothing. It was really about, in some way, really about what the film was about, how it kind of embraced Morocco, and then then we went to Italy and lots of positive stuff and stuff. Then I went to Montreal, and there was a guy from Variety in the audience. I didn't know until later, but he had asked he was really angry with the movie. And I could tell he was an American or Canadian. And then about 5 days later, he wrote a review, which, so this movie was made with no money. It's a poor movie. I'm a poor filmmaker. We didn't make it show any more than it hasn't, its lack of polish is its own charm, but it's not, it's a little movie. It's a very little movie. It's not gonna, make any waves but he went through and kind of like all the problems with the film, never mentioned what the film was about. Like what the film is, and my thought is that he had a problem with what the film was about. That's my only takeaway. But he was really, in the Q&A, he was really aggressive, and I only have never had anybody be that aggressive, and a couple of days later then wrote this piece, and someone that was the guy in the audience that we had like 5 screenings there. So, I don't know, maybe his beef, he doesn't like Moroccans, or but you could think all kinds of things, but that's the only negative review that I got, I think. And then I think a woman picked up some of his stuff. Some of his stuff is wrong, like he says things which are not accurate, which makes me think he wasn't paying attention, or he can't read subtitles.
But you captured amazing moments. I heard the audience laugh and go along, and it's you had a very, very limited budget. I don't know how you were able to.
$12.
Made
us $12
with a very, very low budget. Please, if anybody knows anybody, give him a budget so he can do a high budget film that will rival any Hollywood film. Anyone else has a question? Because I wanted to ask John, what's next? Is there going to be, another? Are you working on anything
So
next?
Doria, you know her. She teaches Arabic.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
So
she's not here because
let's give a big shout out. Where is Bila? To Thuraya Boumahdi,
Yeah.
who teaches Arabic at Stanford. Who is an amazing. I wish she was here tonight.
So one of her parents passed away.
Yes,
Yeah.
her mother
So she's-
sadly
yeah.
passed
So
away.
she's not here.
Allah yarhamha. She is at Stanford, but she's a little bit sad, and
Yeah.
our condolences go out to her. But Thuraya Abu Mahdi is she's really Moroccan.
So
She
she's
comes
from McNess.
Morocco, yeah.
So, I've written 2 scripts. One is for McNess, so we're hoping to go there. But it's like it's a completely fiction film that takes place in McNess. Because the group you saw in here, the musicians, Melhoun and McNess, so we have a friend who wants to do something with them, and so we're going to include. So it's about them. It's a kind of a film about those musicians.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it in the works?
Yeah. So I mean, if if you give me money, then we can make it.
I think I might, sell my car.
Yeah.
To get you on that word. But yeah, so Thuraya, also I wanted to say, sort of defies the stereotypical image of the Moroccan woman or the Arab woman or the Muslim woman. 2 PhDs, fiercely independent, speaks a language that only 30 people on earth speak. which the Muslims used to speak in Spain back in the day, and created this new language. Anyway, I could go on and on about her, but certainly, you know, I'm glad you brought her up because she is what we need at Stanford and in academic institutions, and she does it with kindness and a sense of, you know,
I'll just
pride
put
in
it
her
like-
country. Yeah, please.
I have the film I'm finishing this year is a documentary about a monastery in Utah that I filmed for 15 years, from 2002 until it closed in 2017. The last 5 monks closed it down after 70 years in this valley in Utah. So that's what I'm finishing now. So.
Good. And we look forward to the Moroccan musical band film, John. Anybody else want to? You don't have to ask if you just want to give us your reaction also. بالعربي بالفرنسي أو بالإنجليزي.
كان كتير حلو.
حبيبتي بتحكي عربي أنت. So you were like, we don't need subtitles because I can speak Arabic.
I was just thinking, like, for an American audience, why French and not English?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the narration in French and non-English. I mean, I wanted to screen parts of the film for my Arabic classes because the narrative was in French. I felt the same way, that like it gives you so much about Morocco from, you know, their point of view, and there is no sort of Orientalism going on, you know. But the fact that I hear French, it also hit my nerves in terms of growing up and like being told in Lebanese schools, speak French first, then you can learn your own language, and so. You know, to this day I kind of like to use French, but in a way that, you know, recuperates the Lebanese part of French, you know. We could talk about that later, it's a whole other topic. Yes, Samra, did you enjoy the film?
I'm just going to be honest, I wasn't able to catch the film, but I'm just keen.
Oh yeah, I saw you were in it, but you came, Samra, and you're here now, and I think, you know, the film is really important in that it's generating a much needed discourse that centers on the representation of Arabs and Muslims in Western cinema. I shouldn't really say Western cinema, particularly Hollywood, because I think Europe has been, for a while, producing films that represent Moroccans, Lebanese in nuanced ways. I can think of a slew of movies, many of which are on Netflix, Fatima, you remember that one, and others that show the plight of the immigrant to France, etc. There's one movie I love, it's called America. I don't know if you've ever seen it, please try to see it. It's a charming movie about an Arab family that moves to Illinois, and the culture shock they feel. And it's full of humor, but it's also very poignant, I think. You know, and that was sort of a Dubai, US production. But that's a movie that's kind of worth seeing.
I'll just say, there's a film Spike Lee made called Bamboozled.
Bamboozled.
Came out around 2001 or something, and it's the black version of this. So it's a powerful film. It's kind of a silly movie like this in some ways in terms of the drama, but then there's a period in the film where he shows clips of, you know, American films through the history of cinema and the portrayal of Black Americans. It's pretty powerful. There have been other films, you know, recently dealing with Armenians, but I mean, I guess the answer in terms of like how to address this is like fight on every front, shame people who do this, address it, boycott, make new films and media. But in this country, I think, in general, in the United States, the way any immigrant community, any community coming to this country to make it, whatever that means, political power. So it's about people here people running for office, for local office, for becoming senators, and that's where the power is, because political power is, in this country, is, you know, financial power is not even enough. I mean, that's, you know, you can own whatever, it's something, with financial power you can fund politicians, you know. It's about getting your people into the polls to vote for your people, like your tribe in some way. Unfortunately, that's how you get represented, because then with political power you can
change things, inshallah. Okay, so I think John can hang around. Can you hang out a little bit to speak to people, perhaps privately?
I was going to wait till you, because he was going to sing for us a little bit later.
I will sing Fairuz to if I could, but I would never try to insult Her Highness. And if you don't know who Fairuz is, please speak to any student of mine. who knows the diva of Lebanon, the amazing, legendary singer Fairuz. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I know it's a weeknight, and I know that the topic seems at first foreign, but it is really universal because, as John stated, the demonization of people has changed. I remember another bad Russian, and then of course all crimes were by African Americans. They were the bad guy, and then now it's the Arabs and the Muslims. So, you know, let's try to make this misrepresentation as short as possible. Reem Habibti, alfi shukr for making this possible. The students who came, shukran, and Asas and MSU. You guys rock. Keep doing this. You guys are the heart and the pulse of the Stanford campus, and we really need you more than ever. Shukran, John.
لا شكرا.
Kasab. Habibi, la shukran ala wajib. No thanks for something he would have done happily. Shukran, Habibi. Ma as-salama.